So, Tyler, spring has sprung in the northern
So you can't
hemisphere.
talk about snow anymore.
Listen, it's supposed to snow this week. There's a chance of snow this week. I don't want to hear it. We live fairly far north in the northern hemisphere, so it is spring. The southern hemisphere, you guys are now in fall, but it's warming up a little bit. It's getting nice out for us here, and I'm excited. We're starting to see some of the plants are greening out, and some more animal activity. Summertime is a great time to really start looking out for some of the stuff we've been talking about and looking
Yes,
at.
because I'm sure I can find these tetras in my backyard.
Yeah, right. Just put the pool back up and throw some in there. You'll be good. Convince your family.
Convince my family, hey, can we get a 2-foot pool? I want some pets.
But the main challenge would be keeping your dog out of it.
Anyway, hello
Yes.
everybody, and welcome to Life the Complete Story. As
Yes.
always, I'm your host, Tyler.
And I am Alex.
We will we hope that everybody has enjoyed our little opening here.
Yes.
We're gonna hop right in here with our nature and the news. We're
Yes.
talking about birds. Last week we talked about birds. Our news article. I'm realizing this was really poorly planned.
That's okay. It's not just birds. It's different. It's interesting. It is dinosaurs and how the origin of feathers came about. So, as most people know, feathers, birds use them for flight. In most cases, the flightless birds, it's more of a kind of a thermoregulation thing as well. Many other birds as well as their fur, quote unquote, the way animals have fur to kind of insulate themselves. Birds have feathers.
Correct.
Yes. They started, they use them as a thermoregulation, flight, as well as some communication, primarily when it comes to mating season. Some birds, especially if you've ever seen the birds of paradise, they grow some pretty spectacular feathers, use those to attract mates. The peacock is a big one. And they spread out that big colorful tail. But in dinosaurs, so we're going back a couple 100 million years ago, you can see what are called proto-feathers. Some dinosaurs, especially as you get some of the later dinosaurs, you see them even more. There's a lot of speculation that some well-known dinosaurs like Velociraptor or even Tyrannosaurus had feathers. They were more, I think, for display, especially like Tyrannosaurus being that large. Thermoregulation wouldn't have been as big of a problem for them because they have a lot of musculature as well as a lot of size to help them produce body heat. They wouldn't have, I don't know if they would have been true endomorphs, true as we call them, hot-blooded, like mammals.
Yeah, there's that weird like
mesomorph.
zone.
Yeah.
But the main difference between a proto-feather that dinosaurs would have had and today's modern-day feather is today's modern-day feathers have a follicle similar to like our hair follicles. They have a barb or a barbule, which keeps them like cemented into the skin of the bird.
Okay. And they're kind of like semi-rigid.
That as well.
Yes.
A proto-feather is really just like a singular cylindrical filament that just sticks it, like pokes out of the skin.
Okay.
But so these guys at the Université de Genève, which I don't know what that is. Is that just the Geneva University from like Switzerland?
Yes, University of Geneva.
Was that Switzerland?
I believe so.
Anyway, their team used the sonic hedgehog pathway in the embryonic development of scales, hair, and feathers in these vertebrates. So what they would do is they'd stimulate the pathway by injecting the activator into the blood vessels of chicken embryos to transform the scales into feathers of the feet on the feet. Yeah. So basically, what they did they did some tests by activating it in spots where it's not really supposed to be activated and inhibiting it in spots where it's supposed to be activated. So what they would do is they'd inject the inhibitor on the 9th day of embryonic development, which is the day of the embryonic development where the feather buds start to appear. And that's when you got proto-feathers versus like actual feathers. But about a week later, that was all. The feather genesis was like almost completely recovered. Although some cases they did have chicks hatch with patches of naked skin or dormant follicles, which weren't exactly reactivated to be full feathers.
Yeah. So the kind of the whole point of this is to show some of that evolutionary development from those proto-feathers to modern feathers, kind of where it's still dormant within the genome, that a lot of those older genes still exist, but they've been kind of replaced and inhibited by the more modern genes that allow for what you see as modern organisms like chickens.
Yeah, it's pretty like jaw dropping when you think about it. It's like we used to do it this way and it worked well, but somewhere along the line, somebody mutated and found a better way to do it, and that's just the way it's been. But we still have the blueprints to do it the other way. It just baffles me.
Yeah, it's very neat.
But we're gonna move it on into our lesson for the day. Today we're continuing last week's topic of Shiraciforms. We covered roughly 60% of the groups, and we're gonna cover the other 40% today. We'll start with Tetolucidae. These guys are your pike shiracans. They have an elongated body with these sharp conical teeth. Alex put up a picture for us. Very pike-like. A very elongated, honestly kind of looks exactly like a pike. Just not.
Yeah, a little different. They kind of the mouth is a little different.
Yeah, the mouth's a bit
at
different.
least in this species.
In terms of body form, they look very similar. Their dorsal fins slotted towards the back, like aren't normal pike like that too?
Yes, I believe so.
They do have that little adipose fin between the dorsal fin and the tail fin, which would be absent in pike species. They're about 1 meter long, so that's about 3 feet-ish. And they are 7 species and 2 genera. And a lot of times we see you guys in the aquarium trade, they are labeled as the freshwater barracuda or the freshwater needlefish. Alex, what do we have next?
Right. Next up, we have the pencilfish. Let me make sure I pull up the right picture because I got a couple ready to rock and roll. So these are, as I said, the pencilfish in the group Lebiacinidae. There are 7 genera with 67 species, oftentimes very small and colorful fish, which makes them very popular aquarium fish, and they are known to prey on insect larvae. So you can see that pretty small, kind of small mouth. So typically those little insect larvae just look like real teeny, tiny, almost worm-like. There tends to be an abundance of them. You can think of mosquito larvae. If you see it in like a stagnant pool of water, you see all the little mosquito larvae just floating around. These guys will eat a ton of those.
Moves on to our next group. We got Chalcedoideae. This is a monogeneric species family holding 8 species. They're relatively small, about 6 to 10 inches. However, there have been some recorded as 12 inches, a foot long. And they have a lot of different fin colors, either a lot of times red, yellow, sometimes even glass-like. Alex picked a perfect picture because this guy has yellow and red fins. Our next grouping,
definitely did that on
definitely
purpose.
brainwaves.
Yes. Our next grouping is Iguanodectidae. These are fairly small, but typically brightly colored fish ranging from about 3 to 15 centimeters, found in the northern half of South America. They are under threat of habitat destruction from where they live, but there are still a lot of species that are labeled as least concern in our IUCN red list, and there are 32 species across 3 genera. So again, these guys are kind of similar to your pencilfish, very small, quick little fish, probably feed on a lot of insect larvae as well as, I'm sure, some plant.
So the next group is going to be Acestrodrychinidae, potentially. That might be how you say it. But this means needle jaw in Greek. Once again, another monogeneric family with 14 species. They have that pike-like body form with large conical teeth adapted to predation on fish. You can kind of make it out in this picture just because of how transparent-ish the fish is. You can see the jaw structure and their tooth structure a little bit. But the greatest diversity within the family is in that Orinoco and Amazon River basin, where many of these South American fish are most diverse.
Yes. The Amazon River Basin is massive area of South America, so that's kind of hard to say that that's just one. That's most of the north central part of South America.
Which is also kind of why you're seeing that most of these families we're talking about, the range is northern South America, which would just
Yes.
be the Amazon River Basin and its tributaries.
Correct. Yeah. So next up, the next group we have is Triporthidae. This is a group of 23 species and 5 genera. They were only recently changed to a family. They used to be a subfamily. Do you know what they were a subfamily of, Tyler? Okay, it's not in our notes. I'll continue. But again, most of the species found in that northern part of South America. They're similar in appearance to a group called the hatchet fish, but they're a bit more elongated. So as you can see here, they're kind of broad near the front and then they taper off towards the rear. So they're a little bit more streamlined, but not a ton, not like some of the other ones we just talked about, like the needle jaws. But as you can see, the typical fishy silver color with these guys. You find what they used to be a subfamily of, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and guess Gastropelicidae,
Okay, so
which we'll get to in a second.
okay, yeah, which makes sense. It said they're similar in appearance to the hatchet fish, and that Gastropelicidae is the hatchet fish. So little deductive reasoning there.
Yeah, I use my brain. That'll move us on into our next group, Braconidae. These guys are found throughout much of South America and Central America. They're oftentimes labeled as a South American trout, even though there is absolutely no relation, not even within the same like super order. But they have a diet consisting primarily of seeds and fruits, but have been known to eat invertebrates and smaller fish. And similar to some of the groups that Alex was talking about last week, these guys are known as seed dispersers, where that seed doesn't digest completely and it's still viable for to grow as it exits the digestive tract.
Very cool. So to continue, as I said, the Triporthidae were similar to the hatchet fish. Now we have the Gastropelicidae, which are the hatchet fish, or the freshwater hatchet fish, native to Panama and South America. Bingo, there we go. As you can see, they're a little less elongated than the Triporthidae. They're a little bit bulkier, quite the gut going on there.
Yeah, they're kind of bloated.
Yeah, but they are typically upper level fish swimming directly below the surface. You can see in the image here, a lot of the vegetation that you can see in the background tends to be vegetation that kind of grows near the surface. You see it's very green, kind of leafy. Uh, they're also known to glide across the surface of the water and even sort of fly, quote unquote, using their abnormally powerful pectoral fins along with that elongated sternal region. So that kind of chest belly, they're kind of flattened laterally, and it allows them, they have those big pectoral fins, kind of allows them to kind of jump and glide a little bit out of the water. But there are only 9 species in this family with 3 genera.
That'll leave us to our last group of the day, which is Shiracidae. This is one of, if not the largest groups of Shiraciforms. So there's, well, let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 subfamilies within Shiracidae, and a metric boatload of genera.
Yes.
But for the most part, they all are within that tetra naming scheme, which includes cave and neon tetras. They are important food fish in several regions, which I don't know how, because a lot of them are less than an inch long.
That's a good
So
picture.
I don't quite know what they're eating. They're heavily.
I'm sure there are some that get quite large, or it may be a similar to like an anchovy sort of deal.
Oh, we just pack them like a den and
Maybe. I'm
finger
not
food it.
sure.
But these guys are also very popular in the aquarium trade. Most notably, like a neon tetra everywhere. everywhere. Like your 5th grade science class probably has neon tetra.
Yeah. Yeah, they are incredibly popular because they're small. They are schooling fish, so you get a few of them at once. They kind of live in groups, and in those groups, which is also why they are popular aquarium fish. They tend to be kind of mid to top water fish. You see if there's something on here that talks about that. There's not specifically, unless I just missed it. And because they're very colorful, that's why people really like them. They're very flashy.
Yeah, this is kind of like it's almost like a catch-all family. And then as more and more research and phylogeny gets done, they kind of get like thrown out in their own group or put somewhere else. Like the group that has piranhas used to be part of this before it became its own group, as well as the iguanodectinae were in here before. So was salminae. Salminae was also here before. But there are a handful of subfamilies that each have their own tribes and genera. So there's a subfamily Spinthobolus, which has 2 genera, and they all have a similar body plan. A tetra-like body plan, which is shorter, smaller, kind of streamlined, but I don't even know how to describe a tetra body form.
It's just that your typical fish, kind of
Yeah,
that elongated,
it's a
slender.
fish-like form.
Yeah, some of them are a bit stockier. As we said, like the piranhas used to be part of this, so they were a bit shorter and rounder. But many of the ones that remain in this group tend to be a bit more elongated and not quite as robust.
Right.
There are some that still exhibit that rounded
There's the
form.
subfamily Stethoprioninae, which has the tribes Rhodesinae, Stethoprioninae, Stygichthinae. Oh boy.
To get thinny,
Yes. Yep. Gymnochiracinae, Pristellinae, and Scissorinae.
and there's a multitude of genus that fall under each of those tribes.
Yes. The next subfamily is Did you have something to add?
I was going to say, pretty much all of these tribes have a number of genus. And this next subfamily, there's a couple that only have one or two, but most of them have multiple, 3 or more.
That would be Stevoididae as a subfamily. They have the tribes. And that'll bring us to our next subfamily, which is Chiracinae, which has Proto-Chirodontinae, Pseudo-Chirodontinae, Aphyrochiracinae, Chirodontinae, Compsurinae, Exodontinae, Tetragonopterinae, and Chiracinae. The subfamily, there's a subfamily Crystallinae, which has a couple genera within itself, but no tribes. And then there's, as I said, there's a couple subfamilies that have since been moved to either their own family or within a different family itself.
Yeah. So, as Tyler said, it's kind of that catch-all that over time, there's a good chance that some of these will become their own families rather than subfamilies.
But that'll wrap up today's lesson. We'll move on, as we always do, into our recurring segments. I'll kick us off with our amazing species. Today's amazing species is the Andira, which is, I have a picture of it.
Oh, you have a picture? Go for it then. I was just about to pull one up.
This is what we're talking about today. This is the Andira, known as Hinochelus Wheatlandi. They're found in South America in the Mucuri and Dose River. They are near threatened, so I will move us over into the map that I have. They're extinct within that red region here, which would be off the coast of Brazil. And then once you get further inland, they still have an extant range down in like the Rio Opo. As I said, they're near threatened. Last assessed in May 2022, published in 2023. Awesome. Thank you for your translation.
Unfortunately, neither of us. That's probably Portuguese.
Yeah, neither of us are fluent in Portuguese. Spanish, maybe. Portuguese, not.
I don't think either of us are fluent in Spanish. We could
Not anymore.
we could survive now.
We could pick in peace.
Yes. We both took Spanish in high school, but
Yeah.
it's been a number of years since then, and we haven't used it. If
Since
you don't
then.
use it, you lose it. So,
But yeah, they inhabit freshland, freshwater, inland waters specifically. And their major threats are mining and quarrying and renewable energy. Energy would be.
damn.
But yeah, dams right there. Whoopsies. As well as pollution and invasive species. I thought the invasive species would be a. Nope. There is no protection for them. So chances are we're going to keep seeing this decrease in our friend, the Hinochelus Wheatlandi, also known as the Andira. Alex, what do you have?
Nice. So,
do you have a glimmer of hope for us?
Not really, because my segment is the most wanted. And our most wanted for this week is the African tigerfish. So this is in the family Lestidae, the part of the Trachoforms, of course, in the genus Hydrocynus. Scientific name is Hydrocynus vittatus. So they are a predatory freshwater fish, as you can see. They've got some big old honking teeth on them, and they typically eat other fish, but they have actually been seen leaping out of the water to catch barn swallows in flight. So quite athletic. As I said, they're mostly that silver color with those black stripes and some the red caudal fin, as well as those large teeth. Grows up to about 105 centimeters or 41 inches in length. The males tend to be a bit larger and more full-bodied than the females, so they tend to be a little bit wider. Primarily native to Africa, the Niger, Senegal, Nile, Congo rivers, as well as many lakes. And in their native ranges, they are an important food and income source for many locals, both as that natural source of protein, but as well as recreational sport fishing. However, they have become invasive in, again, some of those areas of southern United States, such as Texas, Utah, and Florida. They're quite aggressive in nature, and those sharp teeth, as well as them getting quite large. They don't have a lot of predators, and they eat a lot of the smaller native fish that you would see in those areas. Kind of quite a detriment to native fish populations, as well as birds as well. They can jump out of the water and catch birds. Their favored prey tend to be things like cichlids, gobies, carp, and catfish. And when they're juveniles, more insects and zooplankton. But pretty much any fish that is available, they will eat. They tend to be more bottom water fish, especially in large rivers and lakes. But in the daylight, they tend to be a little bit closer to the surface where they would catch those birds and then move towards the bottom at night. However, they do only really survive in highly oxygenated water, which is limiting some of their spread outside of, I think, some of the river or large lakes that get well oxygenated, because they are they're large enough to get a lot of that wind and wave formation. But in their native range, they're actually a bit more I don't want to say threatened, but it's a bit more of a concern because of those constructions of dams and weirs. Kind of prevents their migration, as well as unregulated gill net fisheries in those South African areas. So they've been placed on a protective species list in some localities in South, Africa, but globally, they're still a least concern because they have a very wide distribution. But some of them are protected in reserve areas to prevent a lot of that overfishing, as well as that, as I said, they thrive in highly oxygenated waters. So things like agricultural activities and deforestation, pollution have limited some of those areas. But that is all I have for these guys. Kind of pretty cool looking, pretty interesting, but outside of their native range, they become a bit of a problem. Not as big as some of the other species we have talked about, but and that loans itself to, as I said, that kind of need for a highly oxygenated water environment.
And they keep themselves in check. They keep themselves in check based off of their own needs.
Yes. Yeah. But in those areas that they live, they become a bit of a problem because they have no real predators and they eat a lot of fish. Yes.
And that will lead us into our final segment for the day, Ecology Encyclopedia. And, when I say the word for today's Ecology Encyclopedia, you might get a little bit scared, but we're just going to go the basics, the very basic details you'll need to kind of get an understanding of it. So today we're talking about photosynthesis. For those biologists among us, photosynthesis is a lot more in depth than the answer you got in grade school.
Yes. It gets quite, I'll pull up a picture. It's a pretty simple diagram of photosynthesis, but something, especially when we start getting to the plants, it's pretty important. Of course, photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water into oxygen and sugars within the plant. So as you can see here in the picture that I pulled up, it's a very simplified version of it. It's much like many biological processes, is much more complex. But this is kind of the basis of life, more or less. Without this process, nothing life would exist. Really.
Yeah, for the most part.
Pretty I don't know if you want go ahead, Tyler, kind of give them the quick lowdown on how it works.
Right. So the let's see here. Let me jot back my memory now. So how this works is you'll take your water, and there's a series of reactions that take place to break the water down into its oxygen. And then there's also another cycle that takes place to turn the CO2 into a sugar, and they kind of bounce off each other. They interact with each other pretty well. Those are called your light reactions and your Calvin cycle. But for the most part, you get a equation similar to what is it, like 6 CO2 or something like that. I don't remember, dude.
Yeah, your general, yeah, it's
Six
6 CO2 plus 6 H2O
leads to a
equals
C6H2 or something.
C6H12
O6
O6 for your
the
simple
ring
sugars. Yes.
for glucose because the ring.
Yes.
Yep.
And so that's, and then of course oxygen. You have a leftover oxygen.
Yeah. O2, not just a single oxygen.
Yes. Oxygen molecule.
Yes. So when plants do photosynthesis, the sugar they use that they create, they typically store within themselves as either cellulose,
Yeah, cellulose, glucose,
starch.
starches. Yeah, starches is just long chains of simple sugars. So
Yes.
your simple sugars are glucose, fructose, and galactose, if I remember correctly. And glucose and fructose are kind of especially glucose is your most commonly used sugar. That's kind of the standard sugar that is created. And the main differences between all three is just some differences in the bonds on the sugar ring.
Yeah. And then that oxygen gets released through the stomata
Yes.
back into the atmosphere. It's been a minute. It's been
Yeah.
a long minute since
It's
I've
been a
done
while
plants.
since since we've been through this. So the plants do this they have structures called chloroplasts inside of the green parts of the plants, especially the leaves on leafy plants is where this primarily takes place. And plants that you see here is the sunflower that's shown in the picture. It can happen within the green part of the stem as well, but nowhere near to the level it does in the leaves. And in these chloroplasts, you have little structures called thylakoids. They're just like little stacks of discs that are
The
full.
discs are called stroma.
Yes, the fluid that's around them and
Oof,
is the
that is
stroma.
wrong.
But those inside of there, you have the chlorophyll, which is a typically green pigment because it is not absorbed. It doesn't absorb the green light. So your spectrum of light for visible light goes from red to violet, and of course you have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That's your Roy G. Biv is how we always learned it. That's the colors of the rainbow, put it simply. And so the chloroplast absorbs the blue light and the red light, so the kind of the two ends of the spectrum, and that allows. With that, it uses the energy from absorbing that light to kind of drive the photosynthesis process. And there are other pigments within the plants as well, the keratins and the xanthophylls, which allow a lot of plants to absorb other spectrums of light, especially it allows them to absorb that green light a little bit, but it's not as efficient or as abundant as the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is your main pigment that allows for this to take place. And with it uses this process, as we said, to make that sugar and oxygen. And of course, we breathe the oxygen and animals eat the sugars, and then it gets passed up our trophic pyramid as it goes from there. So the basis of all life is photosynthesis, turning just water and carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen, because without it, nothing would exist.
Right. And once again, this is a very basic, generic overview of photosynthesis. There's three different types of photosynthesis per se. You have your C3, C4, and your CAM photosynthesis. Different plants go through different ones depending on the environment they live in. So a lot of plants that live in more tropical regions, like pineapples and things like that, use CAM because
Yeah, there are cacti especially
they
because
that closes the stomata at night, right? So,
during the daytime.
during the daytime, so they don't lose the water during the day.
Correct. Yes, because while there's usually an excess of water within the plant, so the stomata, which are little openings within the leaves that allow the gas exchange, so the carbon dioxide and oxygen to move in and out, but it does allow some water to leave as well. So in areas like the desert, where it's very dry and hot during the day, those plants will keep them closed, and what they'll do is they'll take in a lot of that sun energy and then store it in some like energy molecules within the plant that allow it then at night when it's cooler and not so dry, it'll go through the rest of the photosynthesis process so that way it can intake and expend that carbon dioxide and oxygen without as much water loss, and then eventually it still makes the sugar. And that's why a lot of plants in desert environments tend to be smaller. They have that very thick, like a very thick waxy the cuticle, which is like that waxy outer coating on the leaves or the plant, prevents that water loss. But areas like where we live, that we get like a temperate deciduous forest that gets a fair amount of rain, that is much less of a concern because the water is pretty readily available. So the plants will conduct photosynthesis during the day, and it's much more efficient when they do it because they can do it while they have the sun energy to conduct it. And then at night it'll close that stomata and kind of slow down the photosynthesis and use some of the stored sugar to drive the rest of the processes that it has through the night until the sun rises again. But in most plants, they make pretty much all plants actually, they make a lot more of the sugar than they use because they still use how like animals use the respiration, they use the sugars to drive the metabolism in the body. Plants are way more efficient at that. They don't use near as much sugar as they make.
Anything else to add out?
That's about all I have for that. As we said, we're not going to get too in depth in it. We could spend probably a whole episode just talking about this because it gets pretty in depth.
And we probably will when we get there.
Yeah, we might take some time. That may be a good kind of extra episode to just go through and really get down to the nitty gritty of
Yeah,
it.
get
But
down and
it's
dirty with the plants.
yes, but it's a lot, and even for ourselves, we are not like don't have specific research just in this. We understand it more than probably most, but they, there's still stuff that we don't even understand because we just haven't gotten that far into it. Because you start getting into a lot of like biochemistry, and that gets crazy.
Yeah. But with that, that's gonna conclude today's episode. We finished our talk on Shiraciforms. We'll move on into the knife fish next, and then we'll follow that up with the catfish. But as always, make sure to subscribe to the page on YouTube at Life the Complete Story. Follow us on Spotify at Life the Complete Story. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Life Complete Story. Find us on Facebook at Life the Complete Story, and send us an email at lifecompletestory@gmail.com for any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you have to add to any of our episodes that we have made.
Yes,
We look
sir.
forward to your feedback, and as always, Alex,
Keep learning and learn something new. Never know what you'll find interesting. But yes,
see you
sir.
next week.
Yes, sir. Thank you all for joining us on another episode. We'll see you next time.